The Bloody Tome. Prologue, Twilight in Ashabenford. Year 1486 Dale Reckoning. The month of Elisis, the month of flames. Evening settled heavily over the Ashaba Valley like a wet cloak draped over the shoulders of a weary traveler. The sun, red and swollen like a wound, dragged itself below the horizon, leaving behind a streak of tarnished gold on the rooftops of Ashabenford. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, rotting leaves, and something else, something that smelled like old bones dug up from the earth after years. In the marketplace, where the usual clamor of merchant haggling should have echoed, an eerie silence reigned. Only the hoarse singing of a drunken dwarf drifted from a side alley. Someone had clearly stolen his boots. He tapped out a rhythm on a wooden barrel with bare feet, as if summoning the echo of an old war song. Outside the old oak tavern, whose beams still remembered the days when humans were mere guests and elven rituals were held beneath the shade of mighty roots, stood two guards. The elder, Torin Longblade, leaned on a halberd scarred by orc teeth and bandit blades. His wound, stretching from forehead to jaw, itched fiercely today. That always foretold misfortune. "I'm telling you, Jaren," he muttered, spitting between his boots, which sloshed with rainwater from the morning storm, "this isn't just any storm. There's the same rotten magic in the air as when those damned shadows came out of the woods near Vunlar." The younger guard, Jaren of Mirabar, swallowed hard. His hand reached for an amulet bearing the symbol of Timora, but his fingers found only cold sweat trickling down his neck. "Priestess Elindra," he whispered, glancing around as if afraid of his own shadow. She had a vision. She spoke of trees weeping blood and shadows that devour time. She called it the return of the Dream Watcher. At that moment, the shadow behind them moved on its own. "Excuse me, guardsmen." Both men flinched as if burned. Before them stood a figure in a cloak woven from something neither wool nor silk. The hood cast a deep shadow over the face, but even in the dim light, the eyes were visible, cold and dead like a fish pulled from an icy river. Torin cleared his throat, trying to hide how his fingers trembled around his sword hilt. "Curfews at sundown. The mayor's orders." "What brings you here?" The stranger parted his cloak, revealing hands, too long and pale, with nails trimmed into sharp claws. On the ring finger glimmered a signet of two dragons biting each other's tails, a symbol known only to those who dug through forbidden tomes. "I seek the path of the lost," he said in a voice like the rustling of old parchment. "They say it leads to certain ruins on the edge of Cormanthor. I was told the guards know the hidden passages." Jaren felt cold sweat trickle down his back. "There's nothing there. Just stones and, well, something that shouldn't be. Yesterday, we found a merchant from hills far. Looked like something had sucked the life out of him, his skin hung off his bones like old sheets." The stranger smiled, and the wrinkles at the corners of his mouth were too deep for his seemingly young face. "Ruins are my specialty. I am Dainar of Candlekeep. I have permission from Kelban Arunsun himself." He produced a scroll, but Torin didn't even glance at it. "A scholar?" Torin scoffed, nodding at the stranger's boots, made of strange black leather that gleamed wetly though it hadn't rained since morning. "You look more like one of those aristocrats from the Grey Flood. And seals can be forged these days." "Appearances deceive," the stranger replied, his voice suddenly trembling like a lute string. "But if you prefer, call me a truth seeker. Or simply a traveler who will pay for directions." With this, a pouch appeared in his hand, and when he shook it, it rattled as if filled with teeth. Jaren pointed to a narrow path behind the tavern, where an old oak bent unnaturally, as if its roots were fleeing something hidden beneath the earth. "That's the path of the lost. Leads to the blood ruins. But I warn you, even the grass grows differently there. Like it remembers." Dainar nodded, his pupils suddenly dilating, black as the void. Thank you for the warning. I'll be careful. As he vanished into the darkness, Torin spat. That was no scholar. You know what I feel? That beneath that skin isn't a man. Just something pretending. Jaren looked up at the sky, where a red moon emerged from behind the clouds. Elindra said, when the third moon stands over Cormanthor, the gates will open. That's tonight. Deep inside the tavern, in a corner untouched by light, something rustled. A pair of green eyes flashed in the dark, leaving behind the scent of rotten berries and wet fur. And over Ashabenford, the first lightning bolt struck the watchtower, illuminating its ancient ruins for a brief moment, and they, as if alive, seemed to scream. Chapter 1, Gathering at the Tavern. The old oak tavern buzzed with life, though outside, the storm raged fiercer by the minute. The wind howled like a madman, branches battering against the lead-glass windows, and the rain fell at such an odd angle it seemed to avoid certain spots deliberately. Inside, the warm, flickering glow of brass oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the wooden ceiling beams, scarred by hundreds of knife and tankard marks. At the long oak bar stood Oric, owner and bartender in one. A burly man in his 50s, his graying beard braided with brass rings, a distinctive scar running from his left ear to his neck. His calloused hands poured drinks with practiced ease while Tadek, a curly-haired blonde boy, delivered orders. Behind the counter, on a high stool, sat Mira, a girl with red braids, diligently drawing on the wooden surface with chalk. "Papa, when's Garreth coming back?" she asked, looking up from her drawing. "He promised to tell us how he fought the dragon that only ate cabbage." She burst into laughter, kicking her legs in the air. "Hush, Mira, don't bother your father," chided Bran, her older brother, though excitement gleamed in his eyes too. "But when he comes, we'll tell him how Mrs. Murchula chased that peddler from Hillsfar with a broom." In the corner of the room, on a makeshift stage of barrels, the old bard Haggard played a melancholic tune on his lute about lost elven cities. A few drunken merchants in colorful vests sang along off-key. Leaning against the bar, elbow on the counter, stood a man in a worn leather jerkin. His dark brown hair was cropped short, his face lined with scars. Beneath his cloak, he wore a simple mail shirt, and at his belt hung two short swords with grips wrapped in black leather. "Another ale, Oric," muttered Garreth Silvershade, known in these parts as the Shadow of the Ashaba Valley. His eyes roamed the room, tracking every movement while his fingers absently drummed the worn oak surface. "Garreth!" Mira squealed, hopping off her stool and running toward him. "Will you tell us about the dragon today? Bran says it's not true, that dragons don't eat cabbage." Garreth crouched to her height, and a rare warmth flickered in his usually hardened eyes. "You don't believe in the cabbage Wyrm, Bran?" he asked gravely, though a smile tugged at his lips. "It's a very rare breed, only found in the forests of Cormanthor, and Oric, still wiping the same glass for the past 5 minutes, eyed him beneath bushy brows. "That's your third. Planning to pay in stories again?" Garreth grinned, revealing a chipped canine. "My stories are worth more than your swill." "Papa, don't say that." Mira huffed, stomping her foot. "Garreth tells the best stories. Even better than Bard Haggard's. And he always brings us something," added Bran, trying to sound grown-up. "Last week, he gave us those fangs. From the werewolf of the Sunset Mountains," Garreth finished, pulling 2 small, shimmering stones from his pocket. "Today, I brought you stones from the bottom of the Ashaba River. They say they have magic, if you believe hard enough." Oric sighed heavily as one of the brawlers crashed through the room, smashing a barrel of pickled cabbage. Garreth caught a flying splinter before it could hit him. "Whoa!" Bran gasped. "Can you teach me to do that?" "Someday, little one," Garreth replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Once you stop tripping over your own feet." Oric slammed a fresh tankard in front of him. Drink and stay out of trouble. Last time you interfered, I ended up with a hole in my wall. Garreth took a swig, grinning. And remember that guy with the knife? I left you his purse for repairs. Then Papa had to patch you up. Mira chimed in, eyes shining. He said you have more scars than a dwarven warrior after the Battle of Mithril Hall, Bran supplied proudly. Gareth laughed, a rare, genuine sound. Well, kids, today I'll tell you how the cabbage wyrm stole the entire winter cabbage supply from the Cloud King's pantry. At that moment, the tavern door burst open, letting in a gust of wind and a new figure, a woman in leather armor, her raven black hair plastered to her face by the rain. Oh no, Oric groaned. Not her. Lira Moonwhisper strode across the room, ignoring the curious stares, and stopped before the bar. Her gaze flicked to the children, then to Gareth, who sobered instantly. Go to the kitchen, kids, he said quietly. I bet Mrs. Myrna has cookies for you. I'll finish the story later. Lira spoke first. Spring water. And something that hasn't been stewing in that pot for a week. Gareth turned on his stool, still holding his bottle. Ah, my favorite half-elf. How was the hunt today? Bag any particularly annoying hares? Behind the wall, the children's laughter and Mrs. Myrna's voice faded. Gareth listened for a moment, a shadow of longing crossing his face, for a simpler world where he was just a storyteller, not a killer with a dark past. Chapter 2, Storm from the Tower of Mages. The door of the Old Oak Tavern creaked open, admitting a gust of wind carrying the scent of rain and distant lightning. A figure stood in the doorway, one that seemed out of place in this den of smoke, ale, and rowdy folk. Vaelis Stormcloak stepped inside with a grace unbefitting a floor sticky with beer and sawdust. His slender frame was draped in a high-collared purple cloak embroidered with silver threads in ancient elven runes. His white, almost silver hair cascaded over his shoulders, and his sharp features betrayed noble moon elf lineage. Locally known as the Storm from the Tower of Mages, his temper was as volatile as his magic. His icy blue eyes, like frozen high forest lakes, scanned the room before settling on Gareth and Lira at the bar. He arched one perfectly groomed brow. Must you always behave like a pack of drunken peasants? He asked, his voice smooth as a dagger's edge but devoid of warmth. Gareth spread his arms in exaggerated welcome. Vaelis. How delightful of you to join our humble gathering. Oric, get him something, suitably expensive. So he doesn't feel too at home. Oric sighed, pulling out a dark glass bottle adorned with silver stars. Only because I know he'll pay. In gold, not tall tales like some. Lira didn't flinch, her slit pupils narrowing. What do you want, Vaelis? I don't recall inviting you. Vaelis raised a hand, blue sparks dancing at his fingertips. I don't need an invitation to ensure you don't burn half the city down through incompetence. His gaze flicked to the shattered glass in the corner. I see you've started without me. Gareth chuckled, lifting his bottle. We were just having a tasting. Care to join? Oric promised free ale if I survive. Vaelis's frown deepened. Your jokes are as tiresome as your swordsmanship. Yet here you are, Gareth smirked. Do you like me? Lira rolled her eyes. If you two don't stop, I'll help Vaelis kill you. Oric thunked a crystal goblet of Amnian wine in front of the mage. Drink. Maybe alcohol will make you tolerate each other. Vaelis didn't drink immediately. His fingers traced the rim, magic shimmering briefly, checking for poison. Only then did he sip. Still paranoid? Gareth teased. Trust is a luxury not all can afford, Vaelis replied, glancing at Lira. Especially among thieves and killers. Lira smirked. And yet here you are. Vaelis's gaze shifted to the window, where the red moon Natari rose over Cormanthor, casting bloody reflections on the floor. "Something is coming," he murmured. "This is no time for games." Silence fell. Even Dain, usually oblivious, set down his tankard. Garreth's smile faded. "You mean what the guards saw? Shadows rising from the earth?" Vaelis nodded. "Xar'athos stirs. If true, nowhere is safe." A lightning bolt flashed outside, thunder shaking the walls. The storm's fury seemed to affirm his words. Chapter 3, The Silver-Haired. The tavern door opened with a soft creak, admitting a cool evening breeze. The figure in the doorway commanded immediate attention. Elindra silver-haired entered with a grace that defied the ale-stained floor. Her slender form was draped in a white robe woven with silver threads that shimmered like moonlight. Long, silver-white hair cascaded down her back, and the delicate points of her ears marked her elven heritage. A slender rapier hung at her hip, its hilt adorned with a moonstone, and a white woodbow rested on her back, elegant yet deadly. Her cold gaze swept the room before landing on Lira. "Lira Moon Whisper," she said, her voice like frost chimes. "Still squeezing into those tight leathers, I see. Found someone worth dazzling?" Lira arched a brow. "Elindra. Still pretending to be a wraith from elven legends? How's your endless quest for perfection? Found a way to be even more insufferable?" Garreth, wiping ale off his tunic, looked up. "Another beauty. Is it my lucky day, or am I dreaming?" Elindra's glare could freeze lava. Garreth's silver shade. "Still alive. What a disappointment," Vaelis sighed. "And of course, we've gathered the whole troop. Divine punishment or just bad luck?" Oric wiped his hands on his apron. "If you're going to kill each other, settle your tabs first." Elindra nodded curtly. "Oric. Still keeping this hovel standing, I see. Pity you can't say the same for your patrons." Garreth laughed. "Even Oric can't stand you. That's a record." Elindra ignored him, gliding to the bar. "Spring water. And something not boiled in that pot for a week." Lira raised her glass. "Welcome to the club. Even the ale tastes like dishwater here." Vaelis crossed his arms. "Why are you here, Elindra? Surely not for our charming company." Elindra's piercing gaze sharpened. "Xar'athos awakens. And you sit here drinking as if tomorrow won't come." The room fell silent. Gareth's smirk vanished. "You're serious?" Elindra nodded. "Corellan's priests have visions. Trees in Cormanthor weep blood, shadows move on their own. The gates will open soon." Lira clenched her fist. "So why come to us? To warn us? To gather those who might still change things," Elindra said. "Though seeing you, I regret it already." Dain slammed his fist on the table. "Hey! I didn't agree yet." Vaelis exhaled. "It doesn't matter. If she's right, we have no choice." Gareth glanced at Lira, then the others. "Well, looks like we're in trouble again. Just like old times." Elindra allowed a faint smile. "That's what I feared." Outside, lightning split the sky, thunder shaking the tavern walls. The rain hammered harder, as if nature itself confirmed her words. Over Ashabenford, the storm gathered. And this was no ordinary storm. Chapter 4, The Dwarven Ballad. The door of the Old Oak Tavern burst open with a bang, as if someone had decided to test its durability. Inside stomped Dain Thalgrimson, his massive frame filling the doorway, his heavy boots leaving muddy tracks on the freshly swept floor. His mithril chainmail, though covered in dust and battle scars, gleamed in the light of the oil lamps, and his auburn beard, intricately braided with steel rings, nearly reached his waist. In his hands, he clutched Stormbreaker, the legendary two-handed axe, its blade etched with runes so ancient that even the eldest dwarven chroniclers no longer remembered their meaning. His small, sharp eyes, hidden beneath bushy brows, scanned the room before finally settling on Garreth. For a moment, he stood frozen, then his face broke into a wide grin, revealing golden teeth. "By every anvil in Cosmodan," he roared, charging into the fray. "Starting without me again? That's an insult to the clan." Garreth parried blows from two opponents, his swords flashing like swallows' wings. "Dain! So good of you to join our little." "Shut up and fight," the dwarf snarled, cleaving one of the attackers in half. To everyone's astonishment, the bisected figure dissolved into a swarm of black butterflies, which immediately burned up in the magical light. In the corner of the room, Elindra's silver hair raised her hands, and silver streaks of light shot from her fingers. "Shadow magic. Find the source." Suddenly, all the attacking figures froze like marionettes with their strings cut. Then, in perfect unison, they turned toward the bar. "Auric." Garreth whispered, understanding dawning. They came for. The bartender had already pulled a small iron chest from beneath the counter when the first assailant lunged at him. Lira leapt to help but was thrown back by an unseen force. Vaelis knelt within a magical circle, his eyes burning with blue fire. "Hold them off. I need a minute." Dain and Garreth stood back to back, forming a living barricade in front of the bar. "Like old times, the dwarf laughed, deflecting a strike. "Just missing." Garreth began, when suddenly a volley of black arrows shattered through the window. "Archers," he finished with a curse, ducking behind an overturned table. A new figure appeared in the doorway, a tall woman in leather armor, a black wood bow in her hands. "Looks like I'm late," Sylvaris Nightwind remarked dryly, their old companion. "Right on time." Dain bellowed, smashing another foe. Vaelis suddenly straightened with a howl of agony, his eyes turned completely white. "Got him," he screamed, and a wave of magical energy rippled through the tavern. All the shadowy figures exploded in a shower of sparks, leaving only one standing shape in the doorway. The true sorcerer staggered, weakened. "Now!" Lira hissed, hurling her dagger with a precise, spinning motion. The sorcerer didn't even flinch as the blade whizzed past his head, and struck an unseen observer hidden in the shadows. Blood spurted from the chest of the now visible figure, and the illusion shattered, revealing the true attacker, a gaunt man in the robes of the Black Sentinels. "Traitor!" he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "He is coming." "Xar'athos." The tavern fell silent. Even the storm outside seemed to hush. Auric opened the iron chest. It was empty. "Someone beat us to it," he muttered. "The book is gone." Garreth stepped toward the dying sorcerer. "Where is the Blood Tome?" The man spat a bloody laugh. "Seek the city that dreams." His head slumped. At the same moment, all the lamps in the tavern went out, leaving only the heavy breathing of the heroes in the darkness. Finally, Auric cursed and lit a simple candle. "Well, looks like you've got somewhere to be." Lira pulled her dagger from the sorcerer's body. "Cormanthor." He meant Cormanthor. Vaelis, still pale from the magic exertion, shook his head. "Impossible. Cormanthor hasn't existed for 300 years. Exactly why it's there," Sylvaris said, coiling her bowstring. "The city that dreams. The city that never was." Garreth looked at his companions, Dain, Lira, Vaelis, Sylvaris, and Elindra. "Looks like we're back together. Just like old times. Except this time, it's not about treasure," Dain grumbled. "Oh no," Garreth replied, lifting his cloak. "This time, it's something much dumber." "Saving the world?" Elindra asked with a faint smile. "Exactly." The most boring thing under the sun. Lira rolled her eyes. Shut up and pack. We leave at dawn. And so, as the storm outside finally quieted, 6 adventurers prepared for a journey to a place that should not exist, the dreaming city of Cormanthor. Chapter 5, The Blood Tome. Dain slammed his empty tankard onto the wooden counter, making nearby mugs jump. His broad hand, scarred from countless battles, clenched into a fist. "All right, out with it. What's this urgent matter about?" he growled, wiping his beard on his sleeve. His sharp, beady eyes, hidden beneath thick brows, darted from face to face, searching for answers. Elindra, wasting no time, straightened proudly. Her silver hair shimmered in the lamplight, her gaze as cold as morning mist over Cormanthor. "The Blood Tome has been stolen from the Tower of 7 Dreams. Again?" Garreth cut in, rolling his eyes. His voice was laced with irritation, but beneath it flickered unease. "Can't you mages keep track of your own toys?" Vaelis frowned, blue sparks flickering around his fingers. "This is no toy, Silver Shade," he said, each word deliberate. "It's one of the most powerful artifacts ever created. If it falls into the wrong hands, yeah, the world ends, we all die." Garreth waved dismissively, though his joking tone did little to ease the tension. "Heard it 100 times. Dain, what do you think?" The dwarf scratched his beard thoughtfully, pausing at one of the steel-ringed braids. If this book's so dangerous, maybe it's better off lost?" Lira fixed him with her feline, slit-pupiled glare. Her hand twitched toward her dagger. "The Black Sentinels already have it. And they plan to use its power to open the door of dreams." "Oh, those guys again?" Dain slammed his fist on the table, making the mugs rattle. The wood groaned under the force. "Why's it always some gang of villains? Can't we just steal some treasure and walk away?" Oric, who was pouring another beer, interjected while wiping a glass with his dirty apron. His graying beard twitched as he spoke. "If you're planning a brawl, settle your tabs first. And remember, damages are paid up front." Garreth tossed a pouch onto the counter. Coins clinked inside. "That's my last coin. Probably won't need it soon anyway." Elindra, unshaken, continued, her voice steely. "We must act fast. The Black Sentinels are already in the city. I've seen their marks, black birds on the walls. On the roofs, yes, we know," Vaelis interrupted, his fingers drumming nervously on his goblet. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Suddenly, the tavern door slammed shut on its own, and every candle snuffed out at once. In the darkness came the metallic rasp of steel and a voice dripping with cold hatred. "Nothing. Because you're already dead." Gareth's swords hissed from their sheaths. "Told you this'd be a good party." Lira vanished into the shadows, only the glint of her dagger betraying her position. Dain swore in Dwarvish and hefted his axe, ready to fight. Vaelis raised his hands, glowing runes hovering around them, casting flickering light on the walls. Oric sighed deeply and reached under the counter for his two-handed axe. "Just don't break my new set of mugs," he muttered, bracing for battle. Laughter echoed in the dark, cold, inhuman. "Fools! You think you can defy the will of Xar'athos?" Elindra drew her rapier, which gleamed with silver light. "Not just think," she said, falling into a fighting stance. "We're about to prove it." Garreth grinned wildly in the dark, teeth flashing in Vaelis's runelight. "Let the fun begin." Chapter 6, Light in the Darkness. At that moment, Oric twisted a brass valve beneath the bar, and hidden ceiling lamps flooded the room with arcane light. The brilliance was so intense that the hooded black figure recoiled, hissing as if burned, its cloak smoking from the pure energy. "Not the first, not the last to try slaughter in here," the bartender growled, hefting his battle axe. His usually calm gray hair now stuck out like an enraged boar's. special lighting for uninvited guests. Old rune magic, built into the beams by my grandfather. Lira seized the moment of surprise, her dagger flashed, burying itself in the nearest attacker's throat. The black cloak crumpled, empty, as if no body had ever been inside. Only a foul mist rose from the fabric. Illusions, she warned, falling back into a defensive stance, her pupils narrowed to slits. But something's controlling them. These aren't ordinary tricks. Vaelis was already tracing intricate symbols in the air, his fingers glowing faintly blue. Not quite. These are simulacra, material projections. The real caster must be nearby. His words were cut off by the crash of the door bursting open. Dain Thalgrimson barreled in, Stormbreaker gleaming in the lamplight, his auburn beard bristling like an angered bear's. By every anvil in Cosmodon, he roared, charging into the fight. Starting without me again? That's an insult to the clan. Garreth parried two foes, his swords flashing. Dain! So good of you to join our little. Shut up and fight, the dwarf snarled, splitting one attacker in half. To everyone's shock, the bisected figure dissolved into black butterflies, which burned away in the magical light. In the corner, Elindra raised her hands, silver light streaking from her fingers. Shadow magic. Find the source. Suddenly, all the attackers froze like puppets with cut strings. Then, in eerie unison, they turned toward the bar. Auric. Garreth whispered, understanding. They came for. The bartender had already pulled a small iron chest from beneath the counter when the first assailant lunged. Lira leapt to help but was thrown back by an unseen force. Vaelis knelt inside a glowing circle, his eyes burning blue. Hold them. I need a minute. Dain and Garreth stood back to back, shielding the bar. Like old times, the dwarf chuckled, blocking a strike. Just missing. Garreth began, when black arrows shattered through the window. Archers, he finished with a curse, ducking behind a table. A new figure appeared in the doorway, a tall woman in leather armor, a black wood bow in hand. Looks like I'm late, Sylvaris Nightwind said dryly. Right on time. Dain roared, crushing another foe. Vaelis suddenly straightened with a scream, his eyes turned pure white. Got him, he bellowed, and a wave of magic pulsed through the tavern. All the shadowy figures exploded into sparks, leaving only one standing form. The true sorcerer swayed, weakened. Now! Lira hissed, hurling her dagger in a spinning arc. The sorcerer didn't flinch as the blade missed his head, and struck an unseen watcher in the shadows. Blood sprayed from the now visible figure, the illusion shattering to reveal the true attacker, a gaunt man in black sentinel robes. Traitor! He gasped, collapsing. He comes. Xar'athos. The tavern fell silent. Even the storm outside seemed to hush. Auric opened the iron chest, it was empty. Someone beat us to it, he muttered. The book's gone. Garreth stepped toward the dying mage. Where's the Blood Tome? The man spat a bloody laugh. Seek, the city, that, dreams. His head slumped. All the lamps went out, leaving only the hero's heavy breaths in the dark. Auric lit a candle. Well, looks like you've got somewhere to go. Lira yanked her dagger free. Cormanthor. He meant Cormanthor. Vaelis, still pale, shook his head. Impossible. Cormanthor's been gone for 3 centuries. That's why it's there, Sylvaris said, coiling her bowstring. The city that dreams. The city that never was. Garreth looked at his companions, Dain, Lira, Vaelis, Sylvaris, Elindra. Looks like we're back together. Like old times. Except this time, it's not about treasure, Dain grumbled. Oh no, Garreth said, lifting his cloak. This time, it's something much dumber. Saving the world? Elindra asked, smiling slightly. Exactly. The most boring thing under the sun. Lira rolled her eyes. Shut up and pack. We leave at dawn. And so, as the storm outside faded, 6 adventurers prepared to journey to a place that shouldn't exist, the dreaming city of Cormanthor. Chapter 7, The Road to Cormanthor. Dawn found our heroes on a forgotten forest path, winding deep into the ancient woods of Cormanthor. Mist curled between the oak trunks, forming ghostly shapes that seemed to watch their every step. The air was thick with moisture and mystery, and the rustle of leaves beneath their feet sounded like whispers of long-forgotten beings. Lira Moonwhisper, the half-elf with raven hair and feline pupils, suddenly stopped, listening. Her hand twitched toward her dagger. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, holding her breath. "The air, it tastes different. Like the forest lives by its own rhythm." Garreth Silvershade, the warrior with a scarred face and broken tusks, loosened his grip on his swords, but his eyes still scanned the surroundings. "Told you this wouldn't be a stroll." "But who listens to old Garreth, eh?" he quipped, trying to lighten the mood. Dain Thalgrimson spat on the ground. "Elven nonsense. A forest is a forest. If it looks like a tree and smells like a tree, it's probably a tree." At that moment, one of the trees to their left shifted, revealing a pair of yellow, unblinking eyes. Branches twisted unnaturally, as if reaching for them. Vaelis Stormcloak, the elven mage with silver hair and a cold gaze, raised his hand, murmuring a spell. The eyes vanished, and the tree stilled, but the scent of rotten berries lingered. This is only the beginning. Cormanthor defends itself from intruders. Silvaris Nightwind, the sharp-eyed archer, knocked an arrow. "Let's keep moving. The longer we stay, the more the forest notices us." They pressed on, but with each step, the path seemed to shift. Roots writhed underfoot, and the air grew thicker, sweeter, almost intoxicating. Even the sound of their footsteps was muffled, as if the forest swallowed all noise. Elindra Silverhair, priestess of Corellon, lifted the amulet of 7 dreams. The stone pulsed with soft blue light. "We're close. The gates are just ahead." Dain scowled. "What gates?" "All I see are more trees." Vaelis reached out, and his fingers vanished into thin air, as if touching an invisible wall. "The gate isn't seen, but it can be felt." Garreth stepped forward where the mage's hand had disappeared and whistled low. "So what? We jump into the unknown?" Before anyone could answer, the amulet flared so brightly they all shielded their eyes. When the light faded, an enormous silver gate stood before them, where nothing had been a moment before. Silvaris exhaled sharply. "Welcome to Cormanthor. The city that dreams." The gate slowly opened, revealing a sight that stole their breath. Before them stretched a city from elven legend, white towers piercing the clouds, streets paved with shimmering stone, fountains spraying moon-colored water. But something was wrong. The buildings seemed to ripple, as if made of liquid, and the figures walking the streets cast no shadows. Lira clenched her fist. "It's an illusion. Or something worse." Vaelis nodded. "Don't stare too long. It's only a dream. The more you believe, the more real, and dangerous, it becomes." As they crossed the threshold, Garreth suddenly staggered, clutching his head. "I hear voices." He gasped, face twisted in pain. Vaelis studied him carefully. "The city speaks to us. Each hears something different. Don't trust it." Dain stomped forward, axe ready. "Where's the damned book?" "The sooner we're out, the better." Lira pointed toward the tallest tower at the city's heart. "There. I feel it, calling." They moved toward the tower, but with each step, the city warped around them. The street stretched, then shrank. Passers-by who had ignored them now pointed and whispered. Vaelis clenched his hands. Don't stop. These are illusions. The longer we stay, the harder the city tries to consume us. Suddenly, a figure blocked their path, a tall elf in gleaming armor. Elindra, he said, his voice like a bell. My daughter. You've returned. Elindra froze. Father. That's impossible. Xar'athos grabbed her arm. It's not him. The city is using your memories, but it was too late. The street melted around them, and more figures emerged from the mist, all wearing the faces of those the heroes had lost long ago. Garreth cursed as a young man in battered armor appeared before him. Brother. I watched you die. Vaelis slammed his staff into the ground. Silentium, he shouted, and a wave of magic dispelled the illusions for a moment. Run. To the tower. Don't look back. They sprinted through the shifting city as buildings crumbled, streets twisted, and the sky churned with unnatural colors. Cormanthor was waking, and it was not pleased with uninvited guests. When they burst into the tower, the heavy doors boomed shut behind them. They stood in a circular chamber, its only light a pillar of blue fire stretching from floor to ceiling, and in the center of that light hovered the Blood Tome, open, its pages turning as if read by invisible hands. Lira approached cautiously. We found it. But, something's wrong. Vaelis studied the book, eyes narrowed. The tome is asleep. And dreaming. That's why the city still exists. As he reached for it, all the shadows in the room came alive, forming a figure in a black cloak. Dain growled, hefting his axe. Xar'athos? But it wasn't Xar'athos. It was, themselves. Their own shadows peeled from the floor, smiling wickedly. The shadow of Garreth spoke first, its voice a tomb's echo. Welcome home. You're staying forever. And then the real battle began. Chapter 8, Battle with Shadows. The Tower of Forsaken Dreams trembled as shadows peeled away from the walls, taking on their own forms. Garreth felt blood pulsing in his temples, his hands tightening around the hilts of his swords. Before him stood his doppelganger, the same smirk, the same scars, but eyes as black as the abyss. Not bad at copying. He snarled, leaping aside as their blades clashed with crushing force. Sparks scattered in the darkness. But you forgot one thing. He spun abruptly and kicked a nearby water jug. It shattered, drenching the shadow, which shuddered and lost its form for a moment. It doesn't like water. He shouted to the others, gasping for breath. Lira whirled in a dance of death with her reflection, daggers flashing like lightning. Her cat-like pupils narrowed to thin slits. They're not illusions. They have our skills. She warned as her opponent nearly grazed her throat. Dain, braced against the wall, growled and lunged at his double. Their axes collided with a thunderous crash that shook the floor. They have our thoughts too. This damned place reads us like a book. He roared, sweat dripping down his back. Vaelis stood motionless, his face twisted in concentration. Before him, his own reflection traced the same runes in the air. Waves of magical energy clashed between them, lighting the chamber with a pulsating glow. We can't defeat them with force. Cormanthor will just replicate our attacks. He choked out, feeling magic drain the last of his strength. Elindra suddenly dropped her rapier, which clattered onto the stone floor. Then let's stop fighting. Her shadow halted, confused. The other reflections also slowed, as if uncertain what to do next. What are you doing? Garreth hissed, still gripping his swords. Trust me, Elindra whispered, pulling out the amulet of 7 dreams. This city feeds on our emotions. Fear, anger, it sustains them. The amulet glowed with a soft light, and the shadows began dissolving like smoke. Xar'athos was the first to understand. She closed her eyes, straightened her posture, and her breathing steadied. Her reflection blurred and vanished. One by one, they stopped fighting. Dain barely resisted the urge to charge but finally lowered his axe. Garreth, the last one, sheathed his swords, his face twisted in distrust. As the final shadow dissipated, silence fell over the chamber. Only the blood book remained, floating in a pillar of blue fire, its pages rustling like butterfly wings. Vaelis stepped closer, his voice hoarse from exertion. "This isn't the real book. It's just an echo, a dream trapped here." "Then where is the real one?" Lira asked, rubbing her wrist after the fight. "Where all dreams end," Elindra suddenly answered in a different voice. Her eyes turned white, and words in an ancient elven tongue spilled from her lips. Vaelis recoiled in surprise. The city is speaking through her. "Cormanthor is trying to tell us something." Elindra's voice swelled with the echoes of thousands of whispers. "Seek the Tower of Forsaken Dreams, where those who forgot to wake slumber. But beware the Keeper, for he never sleeps." Then she collapsed to her knees, the amulet in her hands cracking in half, its glow fading. Dain helped her up, scowling. "That was the strangest contact with the beyond I've ever had," he muttered, brushing dust off his chainmail. Vaelis studied the dissolving illusion of the book. "Cormanthor gave us a clue. The Tower of Forsaken Dreams is where unfulfilled dreams go." "Sounds delightful," Garreth grumbled, picking up his swords. "How do we get there?" Silvaris pointed to the floor where the broken amulet had formed a strange pattern. "It's a map. It leads through the sea of forgotten memories." Lira walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Beyond the glass, the elven city was gone, replaced by an endless gray sea dotted with hundreds of abandoned boats. "Looks like our journey is just beginning." Suddenly, the tower shook, and the sound of collapsing stairs echoed from below. Garreth peered down through a hole in the floor. "Something's coming. Something big." "The Keeper," Elindra whispered, still dazed. "He guards the passage." Dain cursed as the first massive tentacles slithered up the stairs. "Tentacles again? Seriously, we can't fight him." Vaelis shouted, tracing runes in the air. "The sea is our only way out." Silvaris was already smashing the window with her bow. "Jump! The boats are close." As the monster burst into the chamber, revealing a grotesque body woven from forsaken nightmares, the heroes leaped through the window, plummeting toward the gray sea below. The fall seemed to last an eternity. Garreth caught Lyra's hand at the last second as she spun midair. Dain clutched his axe, shouting a dwarven blessing. Vaelis and Elindra held hands, their lips moving in silent spells. Silvaris knocked an arrow, ready to fight even in freefall. When they hit the water, the sea was thick as mist yet allowed them to breathe. Around them floated fragments of memories, faces of people they knew, places they'd visited, moments of joy and sorrow. "Swim!" Vaelis commanded, pointing to the nearest boat. "Before the Keeper decides to follow." As they climbed into the wooden boat, identical to the one Gareth had lost his brother in years ago, no one commented on the coincidence. The sea of forgotten memories knew how to touch each of them. The boat drifted on its own toward a distant tower, tall and slender, seemingly carved from ice and tears. The Tower of Forsaken Dreams, where the true blood book awaited, and answers they didn't even know they sought. Gareth looked at his companions, seeing the same question in their eyes. What else must they sacrifice to reach the end of this journey? The sea whispered with 1,000 voices, but none offered answers. Only the boat moved relentlessly forward, into the thickening mist. Chapter 9, The Tower of Forsaken Dreams. The boat hit an invisible wall of fog with a dull splash, and before our heroes loomed the Tower of Forsaken Dreams in all its eerie grandeur. Its walls, built of ice and black stone, were covered in carvings of sleeping faces, some peaceful, others twisted in silent screams. The air around the tower was thick with cold, and every breath turned into clouds of vapor, as if the place itself was sucking the warmth from their bodies. Garreth wiped the frost from his face with his hand. "This place is older than Cormanthor," he whispered, his voice choked by the heavy atmosphere. "It's a prison for dreams that should never have existed." Dain spat overboard, and the saliva froze midair. "Wonderful. So we're fighting nightmares now," he grumbled, tightening his grip on his axe. Elindra, still pale from her encounter with the voice of the city, shook her head. "We're not fighting," she replied, her silver hair glinting in the gloom. "Fighting here will only consume us. We must pass unnoticed." Lira, already as nimble as a cat, leaped onto the stone dock but suddenly froze. "That won't be easy," she said, pointing ahead. At the entrance to the tower stood 3 figures, their own reflections, but not shadows like before. These looked real. They had the same faces, the same scars, even the same battle dust on their clothes. Only their eyes were different, completely black, with no pupils. Sylvaris drew her bow, her fingers trembling slightly from the cold. "The Guardians. These aren't illusions. They're fragments of ourselves, left behind somewhere along the way." Garreth slowly drew his swords, but his reflection did the same. "All right, new plan. How do we get past them if they know what we're going to do?" Vaelis reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass pocket watch. "Time. They're us from the past. They don't know what we know now." He threw the watch toward the reflections. As it flew through the fog, all 3 figures turned their heads, tracking its movement, as if they couldn't resist the instinct. "Now!" Garreth snarled. The group darted past the Guardians, seizing the moment of distraction. As they passed their reflections, each whispered something. "Don't go in there, Garreth. You'll see me die all over again. Lira, do you really think he loves you? Dain, your family doesn't want you back." Lira hesitated, her hand twitching toward her dagger, but Sylvaris grabbed her arm. "Don't listen. It's just an echo." They entered the tower. The interior was hollow, only a spiral staircase led upward, toward a pulsing reddish light. The air was thick with the scent of old books and damp stone. Vaelis raised his hand, and blue sparks of magic flickered on his fingers. "The book is up there. I can feel its magic." The climb felt endless. With each floor, the stairs grew narrower, and the walls bore increasingly disturbing carvings, depictions of themselves dying in various ways. Finally, they reached the top. The chamber at the highest floor was circular and completely empty, save for one object. On a stone pedestal lay the Blood Tome. But it wasn't as they had imagined. It wasn't made of leather or parchment. Its pages were alive, fleshy, pulsing, veined. And where the title should have been, there was instead a carved face. It opened its eyes. "Welcome," said the book in a voice that resonated in their bones. "I knew you'd come. Everyone always does." Garreth reached for his sword, but Vaelis stopped him. "No. This isn't just an artifact. It's alive." The book spread wider, its pages stretching like bat wings. "Xar'athos wants to use me to open the door of dreams. But you want to destroy me. I wonder, do you know what will happen if you do?" Elindra stepped closer. "What do you mean?" The book laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "I'm not just a book. I am a sealed dream. The dream of a god who forgot he was dreaming. If you destroy me, you'll destroy the last thing keeping him from waking." Silence fell in the chamber. Dain punched the wall. "So, what? We can't destroy it?" Lira clenched her fist. "But we can't let Xar'athos take it either." The book laughed again. "A dilemma, isn't it? Fortunately, I have a proposal." Its pages spread even wider, and a swirling portal appeared in the air. At its center, the face of Xar'athos, wreathed in darkness. "One of you will step inside. One of you will become the new guardian of the book. The rest may leave." No one spoke. Finally, Garreth sighed. Well, looks like I'm missing out on drinks again. Lira looked at him, and in her eyes flashed something no one had ever seen before, fear. Garreth, no. But he was already walking toward the book, wearing that crooked smile of his. Hey, at least this time I get to play the hero. The book opened wide before him like a maw. You choose wisely. Step inside, and your friends will be safe. Vaelis suddenly shouted. No. It's a trap. If you enter, you'll become part of the dream. You'll cease to exist. Garreth only glanced back for a moment. You know, Vaelis, sometimes I think that might be a relief. And he leaped into the vortex. The portal snapped shut behind him with a thunderous clap, and the Blood Tome slammed closed. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then the entire tower shook. Run! Dain roared, grabbing Lira, who stood frozen, staring at the spot where Garreth had vanished. They raced down the stairs as they crumbled into nothingness behind them. The tower's walls cracked, and darkness seeped through the fissures. When they finally burst outside, the sea of forgotten memories was churning, and the sky was full of cracks, like a mirror being shattered. Lira was the first to speak, her voice hard as steel. We're getting him back. Vaelis shook his head. There's nowhere to go. Cormanthor is gone. And he's part of the dream now. Dain drove his axe into the ground. Then we'll find a way to wake him up. Elindra looked at the broken amulet fragment she still clutched in her hand. Maybe there is a way. But it will require traveling where no one should go. Sylvaris drew her bowstring taut. Speak, to the land of the dead. Because if Garreth is now a dream, then his soul belongs to the god who dreams. In the distance, carried by the wind, someone laughed, a voice that sounded eerily familiar. Chapter 10. The Path of Forgotten Souls. The forest surrounding the party seemed ordinary at first glance. Trees stood motionless, and morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting golden patches on the ground. But those who had passed through the white wastes saw more. Strands of magical energy twisted in the air, and the shadows were too thick, as if hiding something more than just the absence of light. Garreth leaned heavily on Dain's shoulder, his steps unsteady, his face glistening with sweat. Though he had returned from the white wastes, he felt as if part of his soul had stayed there forever, torn away like cloth fluttering in the wind. We need to find a place to rest, said Sylvaris, her gaze constantly scanning their surroundings for threats. Xar'athos already knows we're alive. We can't let him find us. There, Vaelis pointed to an unassuming inn with a sign depicting a weeping dragon. I know the owner. He's an old world watcher. If anyone can help us, it's him. The interior of the weeping dragon was warm and cozy, filled with the scent of roasted meat and honeyed ale. By the fireplace sat an old man with gray eyes and scars covering his forearms like a map of battles. Vaelis Stormcloak, he muttered without looking up from his tankard. Finally come to repay your debt? Vaelis inclined his head, the firelight reflecting in his cold elven eyes. We need shelter, Malric. And information. The old man slowly lifted his gaze, fixing it on Garreth. This one is no longer fully human. The shadow of the white wastes hangs over him like mist over a swamp. Lira stepped closer, her fingers tightening involuntarily around her dagger's hilt. Can you help him? Malric laughed dryly, the sound like old floorboards creaking. Nothing in this world comes for free. But perhaps you have something that interests me. Dain slammed his fist on the table, making the mugs jump. We don't have time for your games. Speak plainly, what do you want? The old watcher slowly drew a knife and drove it into the table between the dwarf's fingers without even glancing at him. Your memories. The ones you kept after visiting the white wastes. I know each of you holds one, the most precious one. Silence fell in the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Garreth was the first to break it. No. We won't give those up. We've already lost too much. Malric shrugged as if speaking to a stubborn child. Then your shadow will grow until it consumes you entirely. You'll become emptiness. Vaelis extended his hand, and a swirling crystal appeared on his palm. Take mine. The memory of the first spell I ever cast. The old watcher snatched the crystal and popped it into his mouth, swallowing with visible pleasure. Ah, the taste of hope and innocence. Forget it forever, mage. Vaelis staggered as if struck in the chest but nodded. Now help him. Malric approached Garreth and pressed a hand to his forehead. His fingers glowed with a dull light. I see, yes, the white wastes linger in you. But there is a way, you must find the source of dreams. Where? Sylvaris asked, her voice hard as steel. Everywhere and nowhere, Malric replied cryptically. But it begins at the Tower of 1,000 Mirrors, where all reflections converge into one. Garreth suddenly lifted his head, as if hearing something the others couldn't. I know that place, it's in. He didn't finish. The inn's door burst open, and a young boy stumbled in, covered in blood, his eyes wide with terror. They're coming, he gasped. Shadows are rising from the ground. Malric cursed, his face aging a decade in an instant. Xar'athos knows you're here. You must go. Now, he pointed to a trapdoor in the floor. The tunnel leads outside the city. Head north, to the forest of forgotten names. The tower stands at its heart. As soon as they descended into the tunnel and the trapdoor closed above them, they heard Malric's terrible scream, and the sound of something enormous crushing wood and bone. They ran through the darkness, guided only by the faint glow now emanating from Gareth's skin. What did they do to Malric? Dain panted, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. That wasn't Xar'athos, Gareth said quietly. It was something worse. It was the watcher I sent to guard the book, but now he's corrupted. Lira quickened her pace, her breath shallow. So what? We're fighting our own allies now? Vaelis suddenly stumbled, his hand touching the damp wall. Something's wrong, my magic. The tunnel didn't lead outside, it ended abruptly at a wall covered in hundreds of tiny mirrors. In each reflection, their faces stared back, but each was different. Older, younger, happier, or more broken. Sylvaris reached out, her fingers trembling slightly. This isn't just a wall. Before anyone could stop her, her hand sank into the surface as if it were water. Sylvaris. No! Vaelis shouted, but it was too late. An unseen force pulled her inside, and the rest of the party, with no choice, plunged in after her. They found themselves in a space that resembled an endless hall of mirrors, reflections stretched in every direction, forming a labyrinth of impossible geometry. Where are we? Dain shouted, but his voice didn't echo, it was swallowed by the mirrors. Garreth touched one of the panes, and his reflection smiled back at him ominously. This is the Tower of 1,000 Mirrors, where every possible version of ourselves exists at once. Suddenly, a figure appeared in one of the mirrors, Elindra, but not as they remembered her. Her hair was black, and her eyes burned red. You failed me, she said, her voice ringing through hundreds of mirrors at once. You left me there, for him. Vaelis pressed his hand against the glass, his fingers flaring with magical energy. You're not her. The real Elindra would never say that. The reflection laughed, the sound vibrating in their bones. Or maybe I'm the real one, and the one you knew was the illusion. Lira suddenly screamed, her mirror self grabbed her wrist and pulled her deeper into the glass. Garreth drew his swords and struck the mirror, but the blades passed through, leaving no mark. We can't fight them. Dain roared, trying to pull Lira free. Then Garreth did the unexpected, he stepped into the mirror willingly. The space around him tore open, and he found himself face to face with his own reflection, not the black-eyed guardian, but himself from the past, before all the battles and losses. You know the way, the other Garreth said. You always have. And he pushed him toward a swirling portal that suddenly appeared behind them. The rest of the party was suddenly there, torn free from their reflections' grasps. What just happened? Sylvaris whispered, her voice barely audible. Garreth was pale as a ghost, his hands shaking. I found the source of dreams. But to reach it, we have to go through ourselves. Before them stood the final mirror, massive, covered in runes that pulsed with blue light. It's a gate, Vaelis explained. It leads where all paths converge. Dain hefted his axe, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. So what's on the other side? Garreth smiled sadly, flames reflected in his eyes. The answer to the question each of us carries in our hearts. And he was the first to cross the threshold. Chapter 11, The Price of Awakening. The town of designated boundaries looked unassuming in the morning sun, wooden huts, dusty streets, and an old well in the square. But our party now saw more than ordinary people could. Threads of magical energy swirled in the air, and the shadows cast by the buildings were just a little too dense, as if they hid something more than mere absence of light. Garreth leaned heavily on Dain's shoulder, his steps unsteady, his face glistening with a thin layer of sweat. Though he had returned from the white void, he felt as if part of his soul had remained there forever, torn away like a tattered cloth fluttering in the wind. We need to find a place to rest, said Sylvaris, her gaze constantly scanning their surroundings for threats. Xar'athos already knows we're alive. We can't let him find us. There, Vaelis pointed to an unassuming inn with a sign depicting a weeping dragon. I know the owner. He's a former watcher between worlds. If anyone can help us, it's him. The interior of the weeping dragon was warm and cozy, filled with the scent of roasted meat and honeyed ale. By the fireplace sat an older man with gray eyes and scars covering his forearms like a map of battles. Vaelis Stormcloak, he muttered without looking up from his mug. Finally come to repay your debt? Vaelis bowed his head, the firelight reflecting in his cold elven eyes. We need shelter, Malric. And information. The man slowly raised his gaze, settling it on Garreth. This one is no longer fully human. The shadow of the white void hangs over him like mist over a swamp. Lira stepped closer, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her dagger. Can you help him? Malric chuckled dryly, the sound like the creaking of old floorboards. Nothing in this world comes for free. But perhaps you have something that might interest me. Dain slammed his fist on the table, making the mugs jump. We don't have time for your games. Speak plainly, what do you want? The old watcher slowly drew a knife and drove it into the table between the dwarf's fingers, never breaking eye contact. Your memories. The ones you kept from your visit to the White Void. I know each of you holds one, the most precious of all. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Garreth was the first to break it. No. We won't give those up. We've already lost too much. Malric shrugged as if speaking to a stubborn child. Then your shadow will grow until it consumes you entirely. You'll become emptiness. Vaelis extended his hand, and a swirling crystal appeared in his palm. Take mine. The memory of the first spell I ever cast. The old watcher snatched the crystal and swallowed it with visible pleasure. Ah, the taste of hope and innocence. Forget it forever, mage. Vaelis staggered as if struck in the chest but nodded. Now help him. Malric approached Garreth and placed a hand on his forehead. His fingers glowed with a dull light. I see, yes, the white void lingers within you. But there is a way, you must find the source of dreams. Where? Sylvaris asked, her voice as hard as steel. Everywhere and nowhere, Malric replied cryptically. But it begins at the Tower of 1,000 Mirrors. where all reflections meet as one. Garreth suddenly lifted his head as if hearing something the others could not. I know that place, it's in. He didn't finish. The inn's door burst open, and a bloodied young boy stumbled in, his eyes wide with terror. They're coming, he gasped. Shadows are rising from the ground. Malric cursed, his face aging a decade in an instant. Xar'athos knows you're here. You must go. Now, he pointed to a trapdoor in the floor. The tunnel leads outside the town. Head north, to the forest of forgotten names. The tower stands at its heart. As soon as they descended into the tunnel and the trapdoor closed above them, they heard Malric's terrible scream, and the sound of something enormous crushing wood and bone. They ran through the darkness, guided only by the faint glow now emanating from Gareth's skin. What did they do to Malric? Dain panted, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. That wasn't Xar'athos, Gareth whispered. It was something worse. It was the Watcher I sent to guard the book, but now he's corrupted. Lira quickened her pace, her breath shallow. So what? We're fighting our own allies now? Vaelis suddenly stumbled, his hand touching the damp wall. Something's wrong, my magic. The tunnel didn't lead outside, it ended abruptly at a wall covered in hundreds of tiny mirrors. In each reflection, their faces stared back, but each was different. Older, younger, happier, or more broken. Sylvaris reached out, her fingers trembling slightly. This isn't an ordinary wall. Before anyone could stop her, her hand sank into the surface as if into water. Sylvaris. No! Vaelis shouted, but it was too late. An unseen force pulled her inside, and the rest of the party, with no choice, leaped after her. They found themselves in a space resembling an endless hall of mirrors, reflections stretching in every direction, forming a labyrinth of impossible geometry. Where are we? Dain yelled, but his voice didn't echo, it was swallowed by the mirrors. Garreth touched one of the panes, and his reflection grinned back at him ominously. This is the Tower of 1,000 Mirrors, where every possible version of ourselves exists at once. Suddenly, a figure appeared in one of the mirrors, Elindra, but not as they remembered her. Her hair was black, and her eyes burned red. You failed me, she said, her voice resonating through hundreds of mirrors at once. You left me there, for him. Vaelis pressed his hand against the glass, his fingers glowing with magic. You're not her. The real Elindra would never say that. The reflection laughed, the sound vibrating in their bones. Or maybe I am the real one, and the one you knew was just an illusion. Lira suddenly screamed, her mirror image grabbed her wrist and pulled her deeper into the glass. Garreth drew his swords and struck the mirror, but the blades passed through, leaving no mark. We can't fight them. Dain roared, trying to pull Lira free. Then Garreth did something unexpected, he stepped into the mirror willingly. The space around him tore open, and he found himself face to face with his own reflection, not the black-eyed Watcher, but himself from the past, before all the battles and losses. You know the way, that Garreth said. You always have, and he pushed him toward a swirling portal that suddenly appeared behind them. The rest of the party was suddenly there, torn from their reflection's grasp. Garreth was pale as a ghost, his hands shaking. I found the source of dreams. But to reach it, we have to go through ourselves. Before them stood one final mirror, massive, covered in runes pulsing with blue light. This is the gate, Vaelis explained. It leads where all paths converge. Dain gripped his axe, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. So what's waiting on the other side? Garreth smiled sadly, flames reflecting in his eyes. The answer to the question each of us carries in our hearts. And he was the first to cross the threshold. Chapter 12, The Source of Dreams. Crossing the mirror gate was like plunging into an icy river. Garreth held his breath as the world blurred around him, sounds muffled as if behind a thick wall. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a place that defied existence. The space around him pulsed, shifting shape with every blink. Walls turned from stone covered in ancient runes to living branches whispering in an unknown tongue. Droplets of water suspended in the air crystallized before melting back into liquid. The scent of damp moss mixed with burning incense. Where, he began, but his voice caught in his throat. At the very center, a quiet, familiar voice replied. Garreth spun around. Behind him stood Elindra, but not the one he remembered. Her form was translucent, woven from moonlight, her eyes flickering with stars. "You're not real," he said, instinctively reaching for a sword he no longer had. "I'm as real as you are," she replied, her voice like wind through leaves. "This place exists beyond time. I am the Elindra who stayed, the one who returned, and the one who never was." The others joined them, Lira, Dain, Vaelis, and Xar'athos, each wearing expressions of disorientation. Lira pressed a hand to her temple as if fighting a headache, while Dain muttered curses, gripping his axe as if doubting its reality. "What is this place?" Lira asked, her dagger, usually gleaming, now seeming to absorb light. Elindra spread her arms, encompassing the shifting space. "This is the source. Where all dreams are born and where they return when they die. And where Xar'athos was imprisoned." Suddenly, the air before them parted, revealing a massive figure encased in ice, a being with 1,000 faces, each dreaming a different nightmare. "The god who forgot he was dreaming," Vaelis whispered, his fingers tightening around his staff. "He created the Blood Tome, as a key to his awakening." Dain spat on the ground, the saliva freezing instantly. "So all this time, we were just protecting his dream from himself," Elindra finished. "If Xar'athos had claimed the tome, he would have shattered the seal." And then, she didn't need to finish. They all saw it, a world where reality melted like wax, where nightmares took form. Garreth stepped closer to the frozen figure, his breath misting in the air. "So what now? How do we stop him for good?" "You must become the new Watchers," Elindra replied. "Each of you will guard a part of the seal. But that means you'll never be able to return," Lira finished, looking at Garreth. Her voice carried something he'd never heard before, fear. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the cracking of ice. Finally, Xar'athos spoke. "There's no choice, is there? If not us, then who?" Vaelis nodded, his white hair shimmering in the strange light. "Magic is already part of me. This is just another prison." Dain laughed shortly, but there was no joy in it. "Always knew I'd end up some cursed statue." Garreth and Lira exchanged glances. No words were needed. Elindra bowed her head. "You've decided. The process has already begun." Garreth felt his feet rooting into the ground. He looked down and saw his body slowly turning to crystal. "It doesn't hurt," Elindra assured. "You'll dream, dreams so beautiful you'll forget they're only dreams." Lira reached for him, their fingers brushing for a moment before she, too, began to transform. "At least this time, we're not leaving anyone behind," Garreth whispered. The last thing he saw was Vaelis becoming a tree with flowers of ice, Dain a stone statue veined with gold, Xar'athos a fountain of pure water, and Lira a flame that did not burn. And then he woke up, in a small bed at the Weeping Dragon Inn. Sunlight streamed through the window, and the sounds of laughter and chatter rose from below. "A dream?" he whispered, touching his face. He was whole. The door burst open. Lira stood in the doorway, the rest of the party behind her, whole, healthy, alive. "Sleeping till noon while we've been searching for that damned messenger for hours," she snapped, throwing a pillow at him. Garreth looked around, confused. "But, the source? Xar'athos?" Vaelis raised an eyebrow. "Dreaming of being a hero again?" maybe less ale before bed. Dain burst out laughing. Come on, sleepyhead. A real adventure awaits. Malric's cellars got a troll. A real one, this time. As they stepped outside, Garreth paused, looking up at the sky. Had it all really been just a dream? Or somewhere, in another reality, another version of them had just become watchers, guarding a world they would never know? Chapter 13, Shadows of Other Worlds. A cold wind cut Gareth's face like a blade, forcing him to hold his breath. He stood on a desolate street, somewhere on the edge of a reality that seemed to tremble beneath his feet. The air was thick with the scent of rotting leaves and a frost that did not belong to this world, as if nature itself rebelled against their presence. Beside him, Lira tightened her grip on her dagger, her feline pupils tracking every movement. The wind whipped her raven-black hair, making it writhe like living vines. Did you feel that? Garreth whispered, his voice hoarse as if unused for years. That wasn't just a dream. It was something more. Lira nodded slowly. I felt the ice roots digging into the earth. And your hand, she trailed off, as if the words had become too heavy. Suddenly, the air before them shuddered. Space tore open with a whisper, like fabric under a knife. A crack appeared in the middle of the street, narrow but deep, like a wound in the world's heart. Through the fissure, they glimpsed another dimension, a tower of ice where their frozen selves stood motionless, faces locked in eternal determination. Vaelis stepped closer, his white hair swirling like mist. His fingers traced runes in the air, glowing faintly blue. An interdimensional echo, he warned, voice ringing like a bell. Don't look too long. This place drains memory like a leech. But the warning came too late. The crack widened, unleashing a wave of freezing air that turned everything to ice. People in the streets froze mid-step, faces frosted over, mouths open in silent screams. Snowflakes shaped like stars fell from the sky, searing skin like embers. Something went wrong. Dain roared, his beard already icing over. Their world is bleeding into ours. Like two rivers merging. From the fissure emerged a figure, their own reflection, but not the one from the mirror tower. This was the watcher they were meant to become in that other reality. Its voice crackled like breaking ice. The seal is breaking. Xar'athos finds new paths. You must choose, stay and fight, or flee and live on in the lie. Sylvaris knocked an arrow, her fingers trembling slightly from the cold. What lie? What is he talking about? The watcher raised a hand, and suddenly the streets of the town dissolved like a dream upon waking. They stood in an empty white space, just like the one from their dream. Fragments of memories swirled around them, faces of people they knew, places they'd been, moments of joy and sorrow, all suspended like abandoned puppets. This is the truth, the watcher said, pointing to the swirling images. That, his finger shifted toward the fading outlines of the town. Was the dream. A dream meant to protect you. Garreth looked at his hands. They were translucent, as if he were fading from existence. If this is the dream, then where are we really? In answer, the watcher parted, revealing a vast crystal hall. At its center, encased in ice, Xar'athos still slept. The ice was webbed with cracks, and his eyes, thousands of them, watched them from the depths, filled with hatred and hunger. You are in the Tower of Forgotten Dreams, the watcher explained, his voice growing quieter. Your minds fled into illusion when you took up the watch. But now the seal weakens. You must wake. Lira suddenly stumbled, clutching her head. I remember. I remember everything now. We've been here for years. It wasn't us dreaming that world, it was him dreaming us. Vaelis looked stunned. So all of it, saving Garreth, the town, was just a shared hallucination. An illusion to deceive us? The Watcher nodded. A defense mechanism of the mind. But time is running out. Dain punched the wall, the ice cracking under his fist. No. I refuse. If we have a choice, I choose the dream. There, we're free. The Watcher looked at him with sad eyes. Even if it means Xar'athos awakens? That the world you love ceases to be? Garreth looked at Lira. In her eyes, he saw the same struggle, the desire to escape and the weight of duty. He knew what had to be done. There is no choice, is there? He said softly. There never was. The Watcher extended a hand. You must return. Return to your bodies in the tower. And reinforce the seal. How? Sylvaris asked, her voice hard but her eyes flickering with fear. By giving up the last of what makes you human, came the answer. Your emotions. Your memories. Your love. Lira covered her mouth. You mean, we'll forget each other? The Watcher didn't answer. He didn't need to. Garreth was the first to step toward the ice wall, where their true bodies stood frozen in crystal. His reflection's eyes were wide with determination and sorrow. I won't let the world burn just to keep a few memories, he said, pressing his hand to the ice. Frost immediately spread over his fingers. One by one, the others followed. Lira was last, her hand trembling, but in the end, she touched the ice. The ice pulsed with blue light. Garreth felt himself being pulled, as if his very essence was being sucked back into his frozen body. The last thing he heard before the world vanished was Lyra's voice. I'll find you. In every world, in every reality. I promise. And then, silence. Epilogue, light in the darkness. Event date, 30 Hammer, 1487 DR, Year of the Drowned Hand. Deep in the heart of Cormanthor, in a place even the oldest elves spoke of only in whispers, now stood a new tower. Its walls, invisible to mortal eyes, were woven from forgotten memories, and its foundations reached into the very kingdom of dreams. The air around it trembled with ancient magic, and the shadows dancing nearby took shapes no living man should ever see. Inside, in a chamber of ice and light, 5 watchers stood guard over the slumber of a god who must never wake. Garreth, shadow of eternity, the keeper of truth, stood motionless, encased in ice that gleamed like crystal. His hands still gripped his swords, ready for a battle that might never come. Though his body was imprisoned, his mind wandered through the dreams of mortals, seeking signs of Xar'athos awakening. Sometimes, when someone dozed by a fireside, dreaming of past battles, they heard a whisper in their subconscious, I watch. Lira, flame of memory, burned in the half-light, a living fire trapped in human form. Her dagger, though unmoving, seemed to tremble in her grasp, ready to pierce the heart of deception. In dreams, she appeared as a phantom with feline eyes, warning those who strayed too close to dark secrets. Do not look into the shadow, she told the sleepers, and they woke drenched in cold sweat. Dain, stone fury, as unyielding as the mountains of his people. His braided beard had turned to veins of gold, and the axe in his hands, a statue that could shatter peaks. His rage, frozen in ice, was a shield deflecting Xar'athos' shadows. When dwarven clans sang of ancient wars, sometimes his voice echoed in the chorus, stand firm, like steel. Vaelis, whirl of magic, the elf with hair like swirling mist. His fingers, though frozen, still traced runes in the air, maintaining the seal. His voice, bitter with knowledge, resonated in magical currents. Wizards who delved too deep into arcane tomes sometimes heard his warning, some gates should never be opened. Elindra, light of truth, the priestess whose silver hair shone like moonlight. Her rapier, aimed at the heart of darkness, was a blade of pure will. In dreams, she appeared as a guide, leading the lost through labyrinths of nightmares. "Follow the light," she whispered, and those who listened found their way home. Their bodies were imprisoned, but their minds wandered through mortal dreams, like wind through trees. Sometimes, when someone dozed by a hearth in the old oak inn, they could swear they heard a faint whisper, "Dream on. The world is still safe." And though no one remembered their names, their legend lived on. In tales told by bards, in songs sung around campfires, in the whisper of wind through Cormanthor's trees. For that is how all great stories truly end, not in death, not in oblivion, but in a dream that never ends.